The letter in my hands was shaking, but not from the cold November wind whipping across the courthouse steps. 3 years of legal battles, 3 years of fighting for something I never knew existed. And now the judge had just handed me the deed to 700 acres of Missouri farmland. At 19, I owned more property than most people see in a lifetime. The irony was not lost on me that the kid who had been thrown away by everyone was now inheriting a legacy from someone who had been searching for me all along. But let me back up, because this story does not start with victory. It starts with a 17-year-old kid sitting in a group home in East St. Louis, counting down the days until the state would no longer be responsible for housing me. My name is Jose Rodriguez, and I had been in the system since I was 8 years old. Foster homes, group homes, emergency placements, I had seen them all. Some were decent, some were nightmares. Most were just temporary stops where nobody bothered to learn my middle name. The day everything changed started like any other. I was sitting in the common room of Riverside Group Home, pretending to watch television while actually planning my exit strategy. 18 was 6 months away, and I had been saving every dollar from my part-time job at a local auto shop. My plan was simple: get a cheap apartment, work full-time, maybe take some community college classes if I could afford it, keep my head down, stay out of trouble, prove to the world that I was more than just another statistic. Gloria Robinson, the house supervisor, walked into the room holding a manila envelope. She had been working with kids like me for 15 years, and I could tell by her expression that whatever was in that envelope was going to change things. She sat down across from me, her weathered hands turning the envelope over twice before she spoke. "Jose," she said, "this came for you today." Official mail. She handed me the envelope, and I saw the return address was from a law firm in a town called Millerville, Missouri. I had never heard of Millerville, and I definitely did not know any lawyers. Inside was a letter from someone named David Taylor, attorney at law. The letter was formal and confusing, full of legal language that made my head spin. But the basic message was clear enough. A woman named Michelle Price had died 3 months earlier, and she had left me something in her will. The letter requested that I contact the law office as soon as possible to discuss the inheritance. I read the letter 3 times before Gloria asked what it said. When I told her, she raised her eyebrows and suggested I call the number immediately. Before we see how this ends, tell us where you are watching from and hype this video in the comments. This story gets even more incredible from here. The phone call to David Taylor changed everything I thought I knew about my life. He explained that Michelle Price had been my great aunt, my grandmother's sister. She had been searching for me for years, ever since my grandmother died when I was 6. The family had lost track of me when I entered the system, but Michelle never stopped looking. Michelle had owned a farm outside Millerville, 700 acres of good Missouri soil that had been in the Price family for 4 generations. She had no children of her own, and when she died at 78, she left everything to me. The farm, the house, the equipment, all of it. David Taylor explained that there was just one condition. I had to live on the property for at least 1 year and make a good faith effort to maintain it. If I could do that, the inheritance would be mine permanently. I hung up the phone in a daze. Gloria was watching me with a mixture of concern and curiosity. When I explained what the lawyer had told me, she sat back in her chair and whistled low. 700 acres, she said. "Jose, do you understand what that means? That is not just land, that is a life. That is a future." But I was terrified. I had never lived anywhere but the city. I knew nothing about farming or rural life. What if I failed? What if I could not handle it? What if this Michelle Price had made a mistake, and I was not worthy of such a gift? David Taylor had offered to arrange transportation to Missouri so I could see the property before making any decisions. 2 weeks later, I found myself on a Greyhound bus heading west, watching the urban landscape of St. Louis give way to rolling hills and farmland. The closer we got to Millerville, the more nervous I became. The bus dropped me off at a gas station on the edge of town, where David Taylor was waiting for me. He was older than I had expected, maybe 60, with silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He shook my hand firmly and led me to his pickup truck. Millerville was the kind of small town I had only seen in movies. Main Street was lined with brick buildings that looked like they had been there for a century. There was a diner, a feed store, a bank, and not much else. David pointed out landmarks as we drove through town, but I was too overwhelmed to absorb much information. The farm was 5 miles outside town, down a gravel road that wound through fields and pastures. When we turned into the driveway, I got my first look at what Michelle Price had left me. The house was a 2-story white farmhouse with a wraparound porch and green shutters. It needed paint and some repair work, but it had good bones. Behind the house was a large red barn and several outbuildings. David parked the truck and we walked around the property. The fields stretched out in every direction, some planted with corn stubble from the recent harvest, others lying fallow for the winter. He explained that Michelle had been leasing most of the farmland to neighboring farmers, which provided steady income. The house and immediate grounds were what needed attention. Inside the house, I found a life frozen in time. Michelle's furniture was still there, along with family photos and personal belongings. David explained that everything in the house was mine as well, including a collection of letters and documents that might help me understand my family history. That night, I stayed in a motel in town and tried to process everything I had seen. The property was beautiful, but it felt overwhelming. I was a city kid who had never owned anything more valuable than a bicycle. How was I supposed to take care of 700 acres? The next morning, David took me to his office to review the legal documents. The will was straightforward, but there were practical considerations we needed to discuss. The property taxes, insurance, maintenance costs, all of it would be my responsibility. There was some money in Michelle's estate to help with immediate expenses, but eventually I would need to generate income from the land. David also introduced me to Roy James, a neighboring farmer who had been helping Michelle maintain the property in her final years. Roy was in his 50s with calloused hands and a direct way of speaking that reminded me of some of the better foster parents I had known. He offered to continue helping me learn the basics of farm management, at least until I could get on my feet. The decision to accept the inheritance was not easy. Part of me wanted to run back to St. Louis, to the familiar chaos of city life. But something about the farm called to me. Maybe it was the silence, so different from the constant noise I had grown up with. Maybe it was the sense of space, of having room to breathe. Or maybe it was the knowledge that someone, somewhere, had thought I was worth leaving a legacy to. I called Gloria from David's office and told her I was staying. She was not surprised. She said she had seen something change in my voice when I talked about the farm, a sense of possibility that had not been there before. Moving to the farm was like entering a different world. The nearest neighbor was half a mile away. At night, the silence was so complete it kept me awake for weeks. During the day, I wandered the property, trying to understand what I had inherited. The house was full of clues about Michelle Price and the family I had never known. In the living room, I found photo albums filled with pictures of people who shared my dark hair and brown eyes. There were pictures of my grandmother as a young woman, standing in front of the same barn that was now mine. There were pictures of family gatherings, harvest celebrations, Christmas mornings around a tree that had stood in the corner where I now sat. In Michelle's bedroom, I found a wooden box filled with letters. Many were addressed to various social services agencies, documenting her search for me over the years. She had hired private investigators, contacted adoption agencies, even placed ads in newspapers. The letters painted a picture of a woman who had never given up hope of finding her great-nephew. One letter, dated just 6 months before her death, was addressed to me directly, though she had never been able to send it. In it, she wrote about the farm, about the family history I had missed, about her hopes that someday I would come home to the land that was rightfully mine. She wrote about my grandmother, her sister Sharon Price, who had talked about me constantly before her death. She wrote about the guilt the family felt for losing track of me, and about her determination to make things right. Reading that letter, sitting in the house where generations of my family had lived, I finally understood what I had been given. It was not just land or property, it was belonging. It was roots. It was the answer to a question I had been asking my whole life without knowing it. But understanding the gift and being worthy of it were two different things. The first winter was brutal, not because of the weather, but because of my own inadequacy. I had no idea how to maintain a rural property. When the water pipes froze, I had to call Roy James for help. When the furnace started making strange noises, I had to call a repairman from town. Every problem felt like evidence that I did not belong there. Roy was patient with me, more patient than I probably deserved. He showed me how to check the livestock water tanks, how to maintain the equipment, how to read the signs that indicated problems before they became emergencies. He never made me feel stupid for not knowing things that seem obvious to him. The people in town were slower to warm up to me. I was the outsider, the city kid who had inherited what many of them saw as prime farmland. Some were openly skeptical about my ability to maintain the property. Others were curious, but cautious. A few, like Joyce Kim, who ran the diner on Main Street, were immediately welcoming. Joyce had known Michelle for 30 years, and she made it clear that anyone Michelle had chosen was good enough for her. She became my informal guide to small-town life, explaining the unwritten rules and introducing me to people who mattered. Through Joyce, I met Ethan Watson, who ran the feed store, and Laura Moore, who worked at the bank and helped me understand the financial aspects of farm ownership. Spring brought new challenges and new possibilities. Roy helped me decide which fields to plant and which to leave fallow. We repaired fences, serviced equipment, and planned for the growing season. For the first time in my life, I was working towards something that belonged to me, something I could build and improve. The physical work was harder than anything I had experienced, but it was also satisfying in a way that surprised me. At the end of each day, I could see what I had accomplished. Fences that had been broken were now solid. Fields that had been overgrown were now ready for planting. The house that had been neglected was slowly becoming a home. As summer arrived, I began to feel like I might actually be able to make this work. The crops were growing well, the equipment was running smoothly, and I was starting to understand the rhythms of rural life. But just as I was gaining confidence, I received a letter that threatened to destroy everything I had built. The letter was from a law firm in Kansas City, representing someone named Michael Jimenez, who claimed to be Michelle Price's nephew. According to the letter, Michael was contesting the will, arguing that he had a stronger claim to the inheritance than I did. He was demanding that the property be turned over to him immediately. I called David Taylor in a panic. He reviewed the documents and explained that Michael did have some family connection to Michelle, but it was more distant than mine. However, he also warned that contesting a will could be a long and expensive process, even when the challenge had no merit. The legal battle that followed was the most stressful period of my life. Michael Jimenez hired aggressive lawyers who seemed determined to paint me as an opportunistic outsider who had no real connection to the Price family. They argued that Michelle had been mentally incompetent when she wrote her will, that she had been manipulated by people who wanted to keep the valuable farmland away from her true family. The accusations hurt more than I expected. After spending months learning about my family history, after feeling connected to something larger than myself for the first time, having that connection questioned felt like being abandoned all over again. David Taylor fought back hard. He presented evidence of Michelle's extensive search for me, documentation of her mental competency, and testimony from people in town who had known her well. Roy James testified about the conversations he had had with Michelle about her hopes for the farm's future. Joyce Kim testified about Michelle's excitement when she finally located me. But the strongest evidence came from Michelle herself. David presented the court with the bus of letters I had found, including her final letter to me. In her own words, Michelle had explained her decision to leave me the farm. She wrote about the importance of keeping the land in the family, about her belief that I would honor the legacy she was passing on, and about her hope that the farm would give me the stability and belonging that had been missing from my life. The legal proceedings dragged on for months. During that time, I continued working the farm, but the uncertainty was crushing. I could not make long-term plans when I did not know if I would still be there next year. I could not invest in improvements when someone else might benefit from them. The stress affected my relationships in town as well. Some people began to distance themselves, unwilling to get involved in what they saw as a family dispute. Others rallied to my support, but their loyalty only intensified the pressure I felt to prove myself worthy of their faith. This turning point came when David uncovered evidence that Michael Jimenez had known about Michelle's search for me years earlier. He had actually been contacted by one of the private investigators she had hired, but he had shown no interest in establishing a relationship with his elderly aunt. It became clear that his sudden interest in the inheritance was purely financial. During the final hearing, the judge reviewed all the evidence and listened to testimony from both sides. When Michael's lawyer argued that blood relationship should take precedence over Michelle's stated wishes, the judge asked a simple question that cut to the heart of the matter. Where was Michael Jimenez during the years when Michelle Price was alone and searching for family? The judge ruled in my favor, upholding Michelle's will and confirming my ownership of the farm. But the victory felt hollow after months of having my worthiness questioned. I had won the legal battle, but I still had to prove to myself and to the community that I deserved what I had been given. The year that followed the court decision was transformative. With the legal uncertainty resolved, I could finally make long-term plans for the farm. Roy James helped me expand the operation, adding livestock and diversifying crops. I took courses at the Agricultural Extension Office, learning modern farming techniques and business management. More importantly, I began to find my place in the community. I joined the volunteer fire department, participated in church fundraisers, and helped my neighbors during busy seasons. Slowly, the skepticism that had greeted my arrival gave way to acceptance and eventually to genuine friendship. The farm began to thrive under my management. I modernized some of the equipment, improved the irrigation system, and implemented sustainable farming practices that increased both productivity and profitability. The success was satisfying, but what mattered more was the sense of purpose it gave me. I also began to understand the deeper meaning of what Michelle had left me. The farm was not just land and buildings. It was a connection to generations of people who had worked the same soil, faced the same challenges, and built something lasting. I was not just inheriting property. I was becoming part of a story that stretched back more than a century. In Michelle's papers, I found records of my great-great-grandfather who had purchased the original homestead in 1895. I learned about the struggles during the Great Depression when the family had nearly lost everything. I read about my grandmother Sharon's childhood on the farm, about her dreams and disappointments, about the sons she had lost to the foster system and never stopped grieving. Understanding this history gave me a sense of responsibility that went beyond legal ownership. I was the keeper of something precious, something that connected me to people I had never met, but who had shaped the life I was now living. The second winter was completely different from the first. Instead of feeling overwhelmed and isolated, I felt confident and connected. I knew how to maintain the property, how to handle emergencies, how to plan for the future. More importantly, I knew that I belonged there. Spring brought new opportunities. David Taylor introduced me to Sharon Price, no relation to my grandmother, but a local teacher who shared my interest in preserving the farm's history. We began documenting the stories and artifacts I had found, creating a record for future generations. Working with Sharon, I realized that my inheritance came with an obligation to preserve not just the land, but the memory of the people who had loved it before me. The third year brought romance when I met Laura Moore again, this time outside her professional role at the bank. What started as friendship over shared coffee at Joyce's Diner gradually developed into something deeper. Laura understood rural life in ways I was still learning, but she also appreciated the fresh perspective I brought to old challenges. By the time I had been on the farm for 3 years, the transformation was complete. I was no longer the scared teenager who had arrived with nothing but questions and doubts. I was a farmer, a landowner, a member of the community. I had found my place in the world, but the most important change was internal. For the first time in my life, I understood what home meant. It was not just a place to sleep or a temporary stop between other destinations. It was belonging, responsibility, continuity. It was knowing that what I built today would matter tomorrow and beyond. The legal victory that had seemed so important 3 years earlier now felt like just the beginning of the real story. Winning the right to keep the farm was nothing compared to earning the right to call it home. Looking back now, I can see that Michelle Price gave me much more than land. She gave me an identity, a purpose, and a future I could never have imagined. The scared kid who had counted down days until aging out of the system had become someone who counted seasons, who planned years ahead, who thought about legacy and continuity. The farm taught me lessons I could never have learned in the city. It taught me patience because crops grow on their own schedule, not yours. It taught me resilience because weather and markets and equipment failures are part of the deal. It taught me humility because the land is bigger and older and wiser than any individual who works it. Most importantly, it taught me about family in ways I had never understood before. Family was not just the people who shared your blood. It was the people who invested in your future, who believed in your potential, who left you something meaningful when they were gone. Michelle Price had been family to me before I even knew her name. The community that had initially viewed me with suspicion had become family as well. Roy James, who had patiently taught me everything I needed to know. Joyce Kim, who had welcomed me before I had earned it. David Taylor, who had fought for my rights when I could not fight for myself. These people had chosen to invest in my success, and that choice had made all the difference. I began to understand why Michelle had attached the condition that I live on the farm for a year before inheriting it permanently. She knew that ownership was not about legal documents. It was about commitment, about proving that you would honor what you had been given. The year requirement was not a test of my worthiness. It was an opportunity to discover what I was capable of becoming. The fourth year brought new challenges when a drought threatened the crops and a downturn in commodity prices squeezed profit margins. But instead of feeling overwhelmed as I would have in the beginning, I felt confident in my ability to weather the difficulties. I had learned to think long-term, to plan for setbacks, to find opportunities in adversity. During that difficult year, the community support that had developed over time proved its worth. Neighbors shared resources, offered advice, and provided encouragement when things looked bleak. I realized that rural life was not about individual success. It was about collective resilience, about people helping each other through good times and bad. I also began to pay that support forward, helping newer farmers navigate challenges I had already faced, sharing knowledge I had gained through trial and error. The kid who had once felt like a burden on society was now contributing to something larger than himself. The fifth year brought the opportunity to purchase adjacent land when a neighboring farmer decided to retire. Using the equity I had built in Michelle's farm and a loan from Laura's bank, I expanded the operation to over 1,000 acres. The expansion was not just about financial success. It was about stewardship, about ensuring that productive farmland remained in agricultural use rather than being developed for other purposes. With the expansion came new responsibilities and new opportunities to make a difference. I hired local workers, contributed to the tax base, and became more involved in agricultural organizations that advocated for farming communities. The scared teenager who had once felt powerless was now in a position to influence policy and support other young people interested in agriculture. I also began speaking at schools and community groups about my experience, sharing the story of how an unexpected inheritance had changed my life. These speaking opportunities connected me with other young people who had aged out of the foster system, and I started a scholarship program to help them pursue agricultural education. The scholarship program became one of my proudest accomplishments. Using proceeds from the farm, I was able to provide financial support and mentorship to kids who reminded me of my younger self. Watching them discover their own potential, their own sense of purpose, felt like the completion of a circle that had started with Michelle's generosity to me. Laura and I married in the sixth year, in a ceremony held in the same barn where my great-great-grandfather had celebrated his own wedding more than a century earlier. The wedding was small but meaningful, attended by the community that had become our extended family. Standing in that barn, surrounded by people who had watched me grow from an uncertain outsider to a confident member of their community, I felt the full weight of how far I had traveled. Our first child was born the following spring, a daughter we named Michelle in honor of the woman who had made our life possible. Holding my daughter in the house where generations of my family had been born, I finally understood the true meaning of legacy. It was not about what you inherited, it was about what you passed on. The farm that had once seemed impossibly large and intimidating now felt like exactly the right size for the life we were building. Every field, every building, every fence post had meaning because of the work and love that had been invested in it. The property that Michelle had preserved was now something I was preserving for my own daughter and the generations that would follow. As I write this story, nearly 10 years have passed since that first phone call from David Taylor. The scared 17-year-old who had sat in a group home planning his uncertain future has become a 30-year-old man with roots that run deep into Missouri soil. The transformation still amazes me sometimes, especially when I think about how different my life might have been without Michelle's gift. But I have come to understand that the real gift was not the land itself. It was the opportunity to discover who I could become when given the chance to grow. Michelle Price saw potential in a great nephew she had never met, and she invested in that potential with the most valuable thing she had to give. The farm taught me that belonging is not something you are born with. It is something you earn through commitment, through service, through showing up day after day and doing the work that needs to be done. It is about becoming part of something larger than yourself, about contributing to a story that will continue long after you are gone. Today, when I walk through the fields that Michelle left me, I think about the responsibility I carry. I am not just farming this land. I am stewarding it for the future. I am honoring the memory of the people who came before me and preparing the way for the people who will come after me. That responsibility is both humbling and inspiring. The community that once viewed me with suspicion now looks to me for leadership on agricultural issues. I serve on the school board, chair the county conservation committee, and represent our area at state agricultural meetings. The outsider has become an insider, but more importantly, the person who once felt worthless has become someone who adds value to the lives of others. The financial success of the farm has exceeded anything I could have imagined when I first arrived, but the personal satisfaction has been even greater. I wake up every morning knowing that the work I do matters, that the decisions I make will have consequences for generations to come. That sense of purpose is something no amount of money could buy. I often think about what would have happened if I had been too scared to accept Michelle's inheritance. If I had chosen the familiar struggle of city life over the uncertain opportunity of rural prosperity. The thought makes me grateful not just for Michelle's generosity, but for my own courage in accepting a gift I was not sure I deserved. The letters Michelle wrote during her search for me are now framed and hanging in the hallway of the farmhouse. They remind me daily that someone believed in me before I believed in myself, that love and hope can transcend time and distance and circumstance. They remind me that family is not just about blood relationships. It is about choosing to invest in someone else's future. My daughter Michelle is now 3 years old, and she loves nothing more than following me around the farm, asking endless questions about everything she sees. Watching her discover the world that has become our world, I see the future of the legacy that was passed to me. She will grow up with roots, with security, with the knowledge that she belongs somewhere. But I also want her to understand that belonging comes with responsibility. The farm is not just our inheritance, it is our obligation. We are caretakers of something precious, something that connects us to the past and commits us to the future. That understanding will be my gift to her, just as it was Michelle's gift to me. The story of how I inherited 700 acres in a secret has become the story of how I inherited a life. The secret was not hidden treasure or family scandal. The secret was that I had never been as alone as I thought I was. Somewhere, someone had been thinking about me, planning for me, hoping for me, even when I had no idea they existed. That knowledge has changed how I see the world and my place in it. It has taught me that we are all more connected than we realize, that our actions have consequences we may never see, that the love we give and the investments we make in others can echo across generations. The farm that Michelle left me has become more than my home. It has become my mission. Every improvement I make, every innovation I implement, every young person I mentor is my way of honoring the gift I received. I am paying forward the investment that was made in me, creating opportunities for others to discover their own potential. The scared kid who once planned his escape from the system has become someone who helps other kids find their way home. The person who once felt like a burden has become someone who carries the hopes and dreams of a community. The transformation has been gradual but complete, built one season at a time, one relationship at a time, one act of service at a time. As I look toward the future, I see endless possibilities. The farm will continue to grow and evolve. Our family will expand. The community will face new challenges and find new opportunities. But the foundation that Michelle laid with her gift will remain solid, providing stability and purpose for whatever comes next. I want to share this story because I know there are other young people out there who feel as lost and alone as I once did. I want them to know that their circumstances do not define their destiny, that unexpected opportunities can come from the most surprising sources, that it is never too late to discover where you belong. I also want to honor the memory of Michelle Price and the countless other people who invest in the futures of young people they may never meet. Foster parents, teachers, mentors, community members, all the people who plant seeds they may never see grow. Your work matters more than you know. The inheritance I received was not just land and buildings and equipment. It was hope. It was possibility. It was the chance to become someone I could be proud of. That is a gift that cannot be measured in acres or dollars. It is a gift that changes everything. If you are watching this video and you have ever felt like you do not belong anywhere, I want you to know that your story is not over. There is a place for you in this world, a purpose that only you can fulfill, a legacy that only you can create. It may not come in the form of a farm inheritance, but it will come. You just have to be ready to recognize it and brave enough to accept it when it does. The 700 acres that Michelle Price left me have taught me that home is not a place you find. It is a place you build, one choice at a time, one relationship at a time, one act of love at a time. The secret she left me was not hidden in the land. It was hidden in the possibility of who I could become if someone believed in me enough to give me the chance. Today, as I watch my daughter play in the same yard where my grandmother once played, I understand that the story is continuing. The legacy is growing. The investment that Michelle made in a scared teenager she never met is paying dividends she could never have imagined. That is the real secret of inheritance. It is not what you receive. It is what you do with what you have been given. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever received an unexpected opportunity that changed your life? Have you ever been the person who invested in someone else's future? Share your stories in the comments below because every story of hope and transformation matters. Tell us where you are watching from and what this story means to you. If this story inspired you, please subscribe to hear more stories like this one. Share this video with someone who needs to know that their circumstances do not define their destiny. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a story that might change how you see the world. The farm that saved my life is still here, still growing, still teaching me new lessons every day. The scared kid who once counted down days until he aged out of the system now counts blessings, counts seasons, counts the ways that love can transcend time and circumstance. The inheritance continues, and the best chapters are still being written. Remember, you are never as alone as you think you are. Somewhere, somehow, someone is believing in your potential, hoping for your success, planning for your future. Your job is to be ready when that opportunity comes, to be brave enough to accept the gift you may not think you deserve, and to pay it forward for the next person who needs to know they belong somewhere too. The secret Michelle left me was simple but profound. Family is not just who you come from. It is who you choose to become, who you choose to serve, who you choose to love. That choice is always available, no matter where you started, no matter what you have been through, no matter how alone you feel right now. Your inheritance is waiting. Your legacy is calling. Your home is out there somewhere, ready to be built by your own hands, your own choices, your own love. All you have to do is be brave enough to accept the gift when it comes.